that Christians present to Muslims, and it actually assumes a Muslim belief in the Quran. So to answer the
Welcome, everyone, to today's thought-provoking and intellectually charged debate. This is a special occasion as we witness a deep, scholarly exchange between Sam Shamoun, a renowned Christian apologist and biblical scholar, and Muslim Man's Name, a PhD Muslim scholar, in a debate titled, Sam Shamoun educates PhD Muslim scholar on his own Quran Islamic dilemma debate. In this conversation, Sam Shamoun will present challenging questions and arguments regarding the Quran, drawing from both Islamic and Christian sources, as well as historical and theological perspectives. The focus will be on the complexities and apparent contradictions within the Quran. Muslim Man's Name, a well-educated scholar in Islamic studies, will defend the traditional Muslim view of the Quran and respond to Sam's questions with the goal of upholding the integrity and consistency of Islamic teachings. Whether you're Christian, Muslim, or simply interested in interfaith dialogue, so let's get started and dive into this exciting discussion.
In your articulation Islamic dilemma, I don't know if you're aware that when you say the Quran contradicts the Bible and therefore can't be confirming it, that's part of our dilemma. That's actually part of the argument. So this is why when you're saying these statements that the Quran cannot be confirming everything that's with them because it contradicts it, this is what our argument is. It assumes that it's in agreement with those scriptures, but it contradicts them, and hence the Quran is not a revelation from God. Now, I don't know if you're arguing as an academic or you're arguing as a theologian, because when I heard your presentation with Paul Williams, you said you can approach the Quran from two perspectives. Either you can approach it academically, descriptively, and see what the Quran says, or you can approach it from a theological position. From what I heard in your presentation, there was a combination of both. You're assuming that the Quran is revelation, so that if the Quran contradicts the scriptures are wrong. But now, let us try to be neutral. Let us not approach it theologically, academically. So when it says, confirming all that is with them, you stated, well, that means would it confirm even the apocryphal Gospels? Well, that's your dilemma. That's not my dilemma. That's the dilemma that you have to resolve, because there's nothing in the passages you cited, and I have a whole list of them and I can share my screen. And since you went to pre-modern tafsir, and part of your arguments is that you included Sunni tafsirs, I'm going to include them as well. So my question to you is, since the Quran says it confirms what is with them and doesn't qualify it, how do you know that the apocryphal Gospels are not inspired?
Okay, so the first thing is, the Islamic dilemma is a dilemma. It's called the Islamic dilemma because it's an argument that Christians present to Muslims, and it actually assumes a Muslim belief in the Quran. So to answer the dilemma, I have to take a position as a Muslim, which I happen to be. But when we mince over what is the correct meaning of the Quran, because that's what the dilemma comes down to. The dilemma comes down to, you guys interpret certain verses some way, I interpret verses another way. So I appeal to critical historical scholarship on the Quran because that is a good indicator of what the Quran means in its own context, just like we would do the same to critical historical scholarship on the Bible, right? So
yeah, I didn't want to cut you off. Yeah, so now you're arguing
your question.
Yeah, but you're arguing theologically now, so you're going to come in as a Muslim. Because I was listening to your presentation, that's why. I'm going by what you said with Paul Williams. So now that you're answering it theologically, since you assume the Quran is revelation, and I assume it isn't. So now, the argument of the Quran is to convince the Jews and Christians, this prophet is a prophet in the line of the prophets that came before him. And what he has confirms what is with them, and that's one of the arguments he gives, that they should take what he has seriously because it comes from the same source. So now, since you're saying that if we take this, and by the way, I need to screen share it. So you said confirm doesn't mean everything. Well, you have to first demonstrate that, not by going to a passage that says, well, see, in that same Quran, it then contradicts what is found in those scriptures. Well, are you admitting then that this statement is referring to the scriptures in the possession of the Jews and Christians, which would be the New Testament? But you're now assuming that it doesn't confirm all of it, but some of it? Because for you to go to chapter 2, verse 116 or 117, to show that it denies that Allah has a son, therefore, this cannot mean it confirms everything. So that implicitly affirms that the Quran is acknowledging the New Testament and the Old Testament, but not all of it. So earlier you said that the Quran does not at all acknowledge the New Testament. It's aware of it, but doesn't acknowledge it or even appeal to it. So what are you saying exactly here?
So I said earlier, and if you look at the graphic that I had posted earlier, right? So I said that what the Quran confirms is the gospel taught by Jesus. That's how it defines the gospel. It doesn't define the gospel as writings about Jesus, and it doesn't define the gospel as a 27-book New Testament canon. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I'm not referring to the gospel. That was part of your argument. And I agree with you that the gospel that the Quran mentions is given to Jesus, but my argument goes beyond that. It doesn't just speak of the gospel of Jesus, right?
That's fine. That's fine. So, just for starters, though, the definition of gospel in the Quran is the message of Jesus. It's not the New Testament.
But see, that's not solely my argument. I agree.
No, I know it's not your sole argument, but that's a premise for my
revelation
answer.
given to Jesus. But whatever that revelation is, it was there and it was accessible to the Christians per 547 other path, which we'll get into. But my argument was, what was the Quran confirming in the possession of the Jews and Christians? And it says that they're supposed to uphold not only the Torah and Gospel, all the revelation given to them. So this is what I'm trying to get at. What is that revelation in Arabia? What did the Christians have?
So within the Christian canon, within the New Testament, there is content in there that is extant revelation from what Jesus taught, from what the prophets taught. That how do I know what?
What is your criterion to determine that the statements in these books contain that revelation? Aren't you begging the question because you assume the Quran is revelation and it's the standard by which this is true, this is not?
Okay, so the Islamic dilemma is called the Islamic dilemma because it is an internal critique brought by Christians against believing Muslims. The Islamic dilemma is not an academic argument. It is a polemical, religious, theological argument. So a theological argument is brought by Christians to a believing Muslim. I'm a believing Muslim.
To show what? To show that the claim of Muhammad that God sent him is false, that he's not a true prophet.
Yeah, so the Islamic dilemma presumes that the interlocutor already has an established belief in the Quran, and they're trying to lead them from an established belief in the Quran as revelation to a non-belief in the Quran and a belief in Christianity.
Sure.
That's the dilemma. Okay. Right. So, therefore, whoever is answering the dilemma, in this case it's me. Tomorrow you might talk to somebody else, but today it's me.
I like
so in answer. So in answer, no, I enjoy talking to you too. So, as a Muslim, I have at my disposal, right, all the internal resources of Islam to answer the dilemma. And to answer the dilemma, I don't have to go back and start from atheism. Of course, if you want me to do that, I can do that.
I know how you're trying to answer, but I'm critiquing what you think is an internal method that consistently refutes the Islamic dilemma. So we keep repeating the same thing. No. So I want to try to advance the conversation. I am aware that you think that within the Quran, you have the means by which to refute the Islamic dilemma. And I'm showing you're actually confirming the Islamic dilemma if you understand the point I'm making. And maybe it's my fault that I'm not as clear. You think the Quran is revelation, and therefore that Christians and Jews who believe that the God of Abraham sent these prophets, if they are consistent, they're going to have to believe that God sent Muhammad, and the most obvious thing to do is follow him. The Christians come back and say, well, hold on. Since you claim that the same God of Abraham sent you, and that your message agrees with the prophets, well, here are the scriptures that we have in our possession from the prophets. We don't see you consistent with them, and that's grounds to reject you as a false prophet. You're now coming back. I want you to hear yourself, and I know you are. You're now coming back and saying, well, see, internally the Quran says the scriptures are not fully intact. So then you're using the Quran to show which parts are intact, and those parts that contradict the Quran are false, which then leads the Christian to say, exactly, that's what false prophets do. That's what Joseph Smith does. That's what everyone does. When the Bible exposes them as a fraud, see, your Bible's corrupt. Therefore, that's part of the dilemma. The very passage you quoted, 242, you didn't quote 40 or 44. Let me go through this. And this is where you beg the question, saying, well, confirm doesn't mean everything, because here's always refuting it, which refuted actually nothing. It actually pushed the dilemma back further and caused more difficulties for your position. Let's go to 289. When there came to a book from God, confirming what is with them, and they aforetime prayed for victory over the unbelievers, when there came to them that they recognize they disbelieve in it, and the curse of God is on the believers. So that's one. But here, the one you quoted, 242 on the screen, let's read it in context. Children of Israel, remember my blessing wherewith I blessed you, and fulfill my covenant, and I shall fulfill your covenant, and have awe of me. And believe in that I have sent down, confirming that which is with you. So here's the key. I'm sending this down that confirms what you have, so believe it. Now, it makes no sense to say, hey, believe what I sent down, confirming only a part what you have, because there are parts of it corrupt, because that would be grounds for the Jews to say, false prophet. And be not the first to disbelieve in it, and sell not my signs for a little price, and fear you me. And do not confound the truth with vanity, and do not conceal the truth wittingly. Well, you can't conceal something you don't have, Dr. Andani. And perform the prayer, and pay the alms, and bow with those that bow. Will you bid others of piety, and forget yourselves while you recite the book? Now, I don't know if you want to argue that in this context, the book refers to the heavenly one, because it's saying it's reciting that book. So even if it's a heavenly one, they must have a replica of it on earth for them to recite.
The other thing I would say is that Surah 5, which I know you guys are big fans of, Surah 5 is telling Jews and Christians to follow the law of the Torah and the Gospel. It's not telling them to follow the theology of the Torah and the Gospel. Even the earlier verse, and I had a slide on this too, when it says judge, let the people of the Gospel judge by what God has sent down therein, is talking about law.
Okay.
So the funny thing is, you guys don't even follow the law, right?
Okay.
So we have academic studies by Mohsen Goodarzi and by Holger Zelentin. Holger Zelentin has an entire book on this. The Quran is commanding Jews and Christians to follow the dietary laws and the penal laws. And the great irony of a Christian bringing these verses forward as an argument for the Christian position is that you don't even follow the dietary laws.
Now, coming back to you, jumping to 5:43-48, you're saying, we Christians, how dare we quote the Quran that says follow by the law of the gospel when you're told to uphold the dietary restrictions? And Danny, how would the Christians know what the gospel exhorts them to follow if they didn't have it at the time of Muhammad? So you just proved my point. That means the gospel must be there for them to know that the law of the gospel exhorts them to follow the dietary restrictions, which means they had the gospel of Jesus. So I'm going to ask you, what was that gospel? And finally, read your Quran in context. I guess you forgot chapter 3, verse 50, where it says that Jesus not only confirmed the Torah before him, but he made lawful some of the things that were unlawful. So if I follow your argument, then I believe the Quran. That means Jesus made things lawful for his followers that were forbidden for the followers of the Jews. And hence 5:43-48 doesn't make your case, it makes my case. That's why the Christians follow the law of the gospel, because it assumes there are things in it that the previous Torah either forbade or allowed. So we follow the law of the gospel, and that's why Muslims follow the law of the Quran. But again, if your argument is to work, Andani, in 5:46 and 47, how could the Christians at the time of Muhammad even know what the law of the gospel is if that law of the gospel of Jesus wasn't preserved by Muhammad? So here you have Revelations. Historically, they had the New Testament. You can't get around this. And secondly, if they had the law of the gospel at the time of Muhammad, surely they knew what the gospel was. So I'm going to bring it back to you. What was that gospel?
The legal teaching of Jesus, which I said in my slide on option 1, I said the gospel of Jesus is embedded within the 4 gospels. You can find it in there, but it's not coextensive with it.
Okay.
Now, if you were to follow the law taught by Jesus, you would be following a lot of the Jewish laws. At least the Jewish Christians would have to follow certain laws. They'd have to follow the whole Torah, basically, except what Jesus has abrogated. And if you're a Gentile Christian, you should not be eating unclean meat. So do you have pepperoni pizza or do you not? And if you're a Jewish Christian, right, you have to follow the Torah. That's what Jesus taught. So again, what I think you keep doing here is you keep eliding the idea of the New Testament collection with the Quranic idea of the gospel, and these are not the same thing.
It's not what I'm doing.
Well, I think you are. So they're not the same thing. So when the Quran uses a word and it defines it, and then it uses the same word in the same surah many verses later, we don't forget the Quranic definition of the word and then read in New Testament. We have to track the Quranic definition of the word. And the primary problem with the Islamic dilemma, as you put it, is your first premise is the Quran affirms the revelation, authority, and preservation of a 27-book New Testament.
It does.
And the only thing that the Quran affirms is a gospel taught by Jesus. The Quran also says that a party among the children of Israel, which includes Christians, by the way, forged kitab. They wrote something and they said, this is from Allah. So your New Testament, from a Muslim perspective, is a mixture of the authentic teaching of Jesus plus things written about Jesus, as well as, and you brought this up, this whole thing of corruption of the interpretation. Well, the problem is the New Testament technically is a memory account of the teaching of Jesus, which has been transmitted like hadith, plus second, third, fourth generation interpretation of the teaching of Jesus. In the New Testament, both of this is mixed together. So even if you follow the minority view, which says the Christians corrupted the interpretation, but they kept the verbatim revelation, even if I grant that, your canon is a mixture of revelation and corrupt interpretation. They've been mixed together. So what the Quran allows you to do is it allows Muslims as well as contemporary Jews or Christians to recover some of that authentic gospel of Jesus. How do you do it? The Quran itself is supposed to serve as the arbiter and the criterion. And that's not just my opinion. I quoted at the end of my presentation Nikolai Sinai, who's not a Muslim. He himself said the Quran sees itself as the ultimate arbiter of all the prior scriptures and what they mean and what they're supposed to mean. So that is how you recover the original gospel. The other way to recover the original gospel, which we can do today, is if we use the historical critical method that I use to understand the Quran, if we apply that to the New Testament and to the four Gospels, we will be able to recover in high probability what the authentic teaching of Jesus was and what the other stuff that is just interpretation.
Number one, the Quran is not talking about what you can do today. See, you're again either not listening to the argument and you're throwing out smoke and mirrors. The Quran is talking to the Christians at the time, Muhammad. You're not living at that time. So it is irrelevant what critical scholarship in the 21st century think they can do in recovering the gospel. You're not the audience of the Quran. It's referring to the Christians at the time of Muhammad. So to then read back into that modern historical critical scholarship or historical methods to try to find the gospel, that's anachronistic. That's the first error in your logic. Secondly, you then applied a passage where it says that the children of Israel, a part of them, wrote a book of them, and then ipso facto, that includes the Christians. Where did you get that from? It's about the children of Israel. But even if I grant that to you, you're accusing me of reading the Quran selectively. You're the one reading the Quran selectively, because there may have been a party who did that, but the same Quran says, chapter 3, 113 and 114, not all of them are alike. So I'm using the Quran to refute your taking verses out of context. And I'm the Christian. You're the one supposed to be doing that. Not all of them are alike. Of the people of the book are a portion that stand for the right. They rehearse the signs of God all night long, and they prostrate themselves in adoration. They believe in God and the last day. They enjoin what is right, forbid what is wrong. They hasten in emulation all good works. They're in the ranks of the righteous. And then 3:199. And there are certainly among the people of the book those who believe in God in relation to you and in relation to them, bowing in humility to God. They will not sell the signs of God for miserable gain. For them is a reward with their Lord, and God is swift in account. So even if I grant the way you read into that text, children of Israel means the Christians, that's a group of them. But there was another group that would not sell the signs, that recited their revelation, and supposedly also believe in the Quran. I'll even grant that. I'm very generous and charitable. So that didn't help your case. But now 547. Let the people of the gospel judge by what God had revealed therein. You conveniently said that, that means that the gospel of Jesus was contained New Testament, but the Quran does not confirm the New Testament, only those aspects of Jesus' teaching. Now, we got a problem, friend. If the New Testament is a corrupt text, then how is it that a corrupt text can be trusted to preserve the core of Jesus' teachings, and that to know that those are the teachings of Christ without 21st century standards of historical criticism, which did not exist at the time of Muhammad? In other words, by extension, if the gospel of Jesus is in the New Testament, or at least the gospels, and that's where you'll find the authentic teaching of Jesus, then by extension, that means those books must be preserved to be trusted, to know that you're getting the teachings of Jesus. But now you want to go back and say, well, it was third, fourth generation, but you're burying the Quran then. If even what is in the New Testament doesn't actually preserve the authentic teachings of Jesus, you just made null and void this verse, because this verse has no meaning, no application historically, which means the Quran is speaking incoherent babble. Finally, you like to appeal to academic scholarship like Nicholas Sanai. I'll do you better. I will quote the study Quran Muslims saying that 548 doesn't imply what you suggest. Now, Cameron, let me bring it up. Because he's saying, see, 548 means, for the Muslim, the Quran is muhaymin alayh, which means we use the Quran to determine what's true in the gospel. That's a misreading of the context. And I'm going to let the Muslims, not Nicholas Sinai, your Muslim scholars, study Quran, make my case for me. This verse then, along with verses 44, 47, indicates that the Torah and the gospel remain valid sources of moral legal judgment and guidance for Jews and Christians, respectively, even after the coming of the prophet, indeed, even in his presence. See also verse 68, where the people of the book are likewise enjoined to observe their scriptures. All right, now look what it says about 46, 47, then we're going to read 48. In the present verse, both Jesus and the gospel he brings are separately described as confirming the Torah. Let me remind you of the point. Guys, did you hear him? He said 548. He mentioned 548, and he quoted Nicholas Sanai saying that the Quran is the criterion for Muslims to judge those parts of the Torah and the gospel. So guys, is that what 548 says? Here you go. This verse addresses the prophet directly and describes the book sent down to him, that is the Quran, as confirming the book that came before it, just as the gospel confirms the Torah. The Quran is also described as confirming earlier scriptures. The Quran is further described as a protector over the previous scriptures. Now watch, these are Muslims, meaning that the Quran testifies to the validity of the earlier scriptures and serves as their trustee, keeper, and guardian. Nothing about corruption. So let me finish it. The idea of the Quran as guardian, keeper, previous revelation, consistent with 541c, 545c, which report that the Prophet ordered the sentence of stoning for the two idolaters, as well as retribution for killing and injury. Let me skip that part. Let's go here, because I don't want to eat up time. Alternately, it could mean that he should judge the people of the book according to what God has sent down to them, meaning, namely their own scriptures. The Quran being the criterion is telling Muhammad, tell them to follow their scriptures, exactly the context of 543 to 47. Does an incident discussed in verses 41, 43. Although verses 41, 47 taken together suggest the validity of the Jews and Christians judging by their own scriptures, and thus continuing spiritual guidance to be found in those scriptures, the verse goes further by asserting the provincial nature of different religious communities and their distinct laws and practices. You can give me Nicholas Sanai, I'll give you the Muslim scholars of study Quran that disagree. So there you go. And I didn't say, just correct it, I know you said legal judgments, but again, how can they know what the legal judgments of Jesus are if they don't have his authentic gospel? I think it's over by now.
The speaker emphasizes that the Islamic dilemma is an argument used by Christians against Muslims, assuming that Muslims believe in the Quran as revelation. The dilemma, as presented, is meant to challenge the Muslim belief in the Quran by pointing out contradictions with the Christian scriptures. The Muslim speaker responds by arguing that the Quran's claim to confirm what is with them, the Jews and Christians, doesn't mean everything in the scriptures is affirmed, and that interpretations of the Quran must be carefully considered, particularly in light of critical historical scholarship. The Quran statement that it confirms what is with the Jews and Christians is central to the debate. The Christian position, as articulated here, is that if the Quran claims to confirm the scriptures, it must confirm them in their entirety, including the parts that Christians have today, New Testament and Old Testament. The Muslim counter-argument is that the Quran does not confirm every aspect of the scriptures as they exist today, especially given what they see as corruption in this text over time. The Christian speaker criticizes the Muslim speaker for assuming the Quran is revelation, arguing that this presumption leads to circular reasoning when answering the dilemma. The Christian position suggests that the Quran cannot be regarded as authoritative if it contradicts the Bible, which is already established as divinely inspired. The Muslim speaker, however, defends the Quran's position as being internally consistent within the framework of Islam. They point out that the confirming of the scriptures must be understood in light of the Quran's own revelation, and they avoid assuming that it must validate everything within the Christian and Jewish text. The Christian speaker questions what the gospel referenced in the Quran is, and argues that for the Quran's claim to make sense, the gospel of Jesus and its teachings must have been available and known to the Christians at the time of Muhammad. The Muslim speaker agrees that the gospel refers to the message of Jesus but insists that it doesn't necessarily equate to the 27-book New Testament canon. The gospel, in the Quran's view, would refer to the teachings and revelations given to Jesus, not necessarily the text as they have been compiled in the Christian Bible. The Christian speaker presses the argument that if the Quran confirms the law of the gospel, then the law must have been known and preserved at the time of Muhammad. They argue that the Quran's reliance on the gospel as a source of legal teaching implies that the gospel must have been present in some form. The Muslim speaker responds by indicating that the Quran may confirm some aspects of the gospel but does not necessarily affirm all the teachings as they appear in the New Testament. The argument here is that historical context and preservation of the text must be taken into account when considering what the Quran affirms. A recurring issue in the debate is the accusation of circular reasoning. The Christian speaker suggests that the Muslim is assuming the Quran is authoritative and infallible, which leads to an interpretation that justifies contradictions. The Muslim speaker counters by asserting that from an Islamic theological perspective, the Quran is indeed authoritative and should be interpreted within that framework. This debate revolves around complex theological issues about the nature of divine revelation, the relationship between the Quran and the Bible, and the preservation and interpretation of sacred texts. The central issue is the Quranic claim to confirm the scriptures, which the Christian argues should imply full validation of the Bible. The Muslim speaker contends that the Quran's affirmation of the scriptures must be understood in a way that doesn't necessarily mean it validates every part of the Jewish and Christian scriptures as they exist today. Thank you for joining us for this enlightening and powerful debate. Today, we've witnessed a high-level exchange between Shamoun and Muslim man's name on critical theological questions surrounding the Quran and its teachings. Sam has presented thought-provoking arguments, challenging the consistency and reliability of the Quran, while Muslim man's name has responded with the traditional Islamic perspective, seeking to defend the integrity of the Quranic text. Whether you agreed or disagreed with the positions presented, we hope this debate has encouraged deeper reflection on the fundamental questions of faith, scripture, and history. The issues discussed today have profound implications for both Christians and Muslims, and we encourage you, the viewer, to continue studying these texts, questioning assumptions, and seeking truth. Thank you again to both debaters for their time and for engaging in this respectful and insightful dialogue. We look forward to future discussions on these important topics. Until next time, keep searching for understanding, and may you be blessed with wisdom and clarity.